In our previous lecture, we spoke about how language is actually made up of verbal and non-verbal, and how these two aspects of language actually has four different types of functions, and how language can actually make us a better communicator. And by being better communicator, you can actually be or use better communicative skills in order to be an effective critical thinker. Well, an extension to what we discussed previously, let's take a look at the English language itself. Well, if you notice, the language is very dynamic. It has a constant change where new words are being added, and we also have rebranding or rephrasing older versions of the language where we have a lot of, for example, IT terms being included. So this constant flux of words actually makes it very dynamic, where words actually move in and also tend to be forgotten and move out. So, in order for you to communicate very accurately and clearly, it is important for you to understand the difference between these two important terms, denotative and connotative meanings of words. So, I like to call it as the big D and the big C. So, denotative meaning actually is quite simple. It's actually a dictionary definition of a word. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, if you take a word, for example, table, and you look for the word in a dictionary, whatever explanation or definition given in the dictionary is actually the denotative meaning of the word table. So what can this mean? So denotative meaning of a word basically, or a phrase even, basically expresses the properties of the object. So most probably, if you take a look at the word table, they would actually tell you that it has four legs compared to a chair, maybe. And the being of the object. So what state of the object it is, and the event the word is always used or symbolized. Okay, now let's take a look at the C, which is the connotative meaning of a word or a phrase. So connotative meaning is one step deeper, one step higher than denotative meaning. So connotative meaning actually includes feelings, emotions. It could be personal, it could be a societal reflex on that word based on past experiences and also associations. What does this mean? This means that a word's connotative meaning can be in a dictionary listing, but it could also be a shared expression, a shared meaning only with a small group. One good example would be stereotypes. So when you want to compare these two, if it's in Malay, I would say that it's either maksud tersirat or tersurat, you know. Okay, let's take a look at this example. So this is a picture of a dog. Well, the denotative meaning is quite clear. We all know that it's an animal. It's a canine. It's domesticated. And we have many other terms associated to that. But this denotative meaning is just literally a dog. But try taking the same word now, dog, and look at it in the context of connotative. So it might not really strike you, but when someone addresses another person as a dog, it could be a little embarrassing, insulting even, when a person addresses another person as a dog. He or she does not mean the other person is actually a four-legged animal, but what does this person mean then? This person is probably trying to lower the other person's image, credentials, or even objectifying this person, reducing this person to the quality of a dog. So this could be an insult. Well, now let's take a look at the different types of word definitions. There are many, but for our course of study, we'll be focusing on the four major types of word definitions. Yeah, so we've got the stipulative, lexical, precising, and persuasive definitions. Well, stipulative definitions are definitions given to new words or terms, or even new definitions given to existing words. Okay, so you got it. We've got two levels of stipulative definitions. One, a new term altogether. And number two, we already have the word, but the word now is being used on a different level. Okay, let me give you some examples on this. Let's say we have a scientist coming up with a new invention, and he calls it as Zazi. So Zazi now becomes a new word. So it is the stipulation of, the stipulative definition of the new invention, defining the invention. It does not exist, but now it is. Or it could be a word that is so common, so familiar. Take, for example, this word Google. So Google is actually, like all of us know, is just an application, a browsing application that is available everywhere. So it's a product. But recently, not that recent though, the Oxford English Dictionary has included the word Google into our lexical system. So I could literally say, I am going to Google who's the richest guy on earth. What does that mean? It means that to look for, to search for. So Google now has been assimilated into the context of looking for information. So that's how existing words get new definitions under stipulative definitions. Now, let's move on to the second type of word definition. The second type of word definition would be the lexical definition. Lexical definitions are quite okay, quite easy to understand because they are the definitions that exist in the dictionaries. Okay, so if you have a word, then whatever you get in the dictionary is basically the lexical definition of that particular word. So no problem in understanding that. But let's take a look at the third type of word definition. The third type of word definition is called the precising definition. So the precising definition is more or less used to reduce vagueness, ambiguity. Why? If you take a look at the word itself, it's precise. So these type of definitions, in my opinion, are usually used in the sciences. Okay, and precising definitions have got two subsets or two different categories. Number one, theoretical definitions, and number two, operational definitions. So when we talk about the theoretical definitions in precising definitions, they basically are used in order to explain, define a theory. For example, the word energy. Okay, so it's quite different in context. If I say I do not have the energy to work overtime, it simply means lexical, where you just say you don't have the energy, the stamina to do a work. But when you use the word energy and you take a look at the definition in terms of a theory, energy actually has a very specific definition. Okay, or power, work. Work is actually force done over a distance. So then you get the definition where it's very much the theory of it. So that's the theoretical definition. Now, let's take a look at the second type of precising definition, which is actually the operational definition. So operational definitions are quite interesting, maybe used more in statistics or mathematics, where it provides standards in data collection. So you have to use some sort of data in order to get this sort of definition. The simplest that I could think of would be BMI calculation, where you have to look at your body's mass index, right, BMI, by actually looking at your weight in a standard unit divided by your height squared. So then you get a very standardized form of BMI. So this definition can always be calculated, can be processed by weight divided by height squared. So that's an operation where you have to do some sort of operation calculation in order to get it. Now, let's take a look at the last form of the definition, persuasive definition. So persuasive definition, from the word itself, you can get some idea that it's used to influence or persuade others. So this sort of definition is usually inclusive of opinions, personal biasness, prejudices. So if I want to, for example, give you the definition of the slums, so rather than giving you a very neutral one, I could persuade you into believing that the slums are actually dirty, are for the poor, does not fit. The slums should even be eradicated, you know. So I could do that by using words in my definition to persuade you to give that negative effect on the word slums. Okay, let's take a look at this one example, the word homely. The word homely, for example, is very different in the US compared to another country, say Canada. Why? Because in the United States, homely is just merely plain, very unattractive, very boring. But in Canada, for example, homely basically means very comfortable, very cozy, makes you feel at home. So what you have to understand is that even though we are dealing with lexical definitions, which are very direct from the dictionary, but it could vary, the meanings, could vary from a country to another country, could vary from a place to another place, could vary from a speaker to another speaker. So it's very important for you to understand the context of the word that's being used in order to understand each definition is being used. Now, we were talking about definitions, right? But how do you actually evaluate these definitions? Have you ever thought about when someone defines a word, whether this definition is actually accurate, is good, is apt? Well, there are actually 5 criteria that's being used in order to evaluate word definition. So it's going to be a little bit lengthy, but a very good definition will always be just nice. What do I mean by that? Good definitions can never be too broad nor too narrow. So how do you then get the right word? For example, let's take a look at the example I gave you earlier, table. So if I were to define the word table, I could go on by saying that it's a type of furniture. It has 4 legs. It's usually used in study, in kitchens, and it's made up of usually wood, steel, and a table is usually done, or it was invented. I could go on giving you history of the table. I could go on giving you whether tables will have future in will have a future in the coming times. But don't you think that these definitions, or these lengthy definitions, are way too broad for someone of a 5-year-old who comes to you and asks you, what is a table? So it might be difficult for the 5-year-old to understand that table is of so much of information. So then it becomes a not so good definition. It's too broad. But if at all you want to make it short or narrow, again, the same 5-year-old comes to you and asks you what's a table, and then you say it's a type of furniture. How do you think that the 5-year-old would be able to differentiate between, say, a chair and a table? Because both the chair and the table would have 4 legs. So you have to give good definition by giving you the essential properties, but yet not so much. Then it becomes a good definition. Sorry. So that's the first point. Not too broad, nor not too narrow. So the second point of a good definition, yeah. So a good definition should always state the essential attributes. This is what I was talking to you earlier of the term that's being defined. So you have to tell us what is it, in what category does it belong, the being of it, and how can it be used, for example. So then it's quite clear. So if I come and ask you, what's a cat, and you tell me that it's a living thing, and it's not sufficient. It doesn't have enough information for someone to actually know what is a cat. So you can go on by saying that a cat is an animal, domesticated, feline, furry, and there are different types of cats. So then people know that it's a cat. All right, now let's take a look at the third criteria. So a good definition should not be circular. So this is very important. If you notice, some people would have a tendency to do this. What do you mean by circular? Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say I ask you, what's the definition of a teacher? And you tell me that a teacher is a person who teaches. Well, technically it's not wrong. It's still a definition. You still provide me the attribute of being a teacher, but I still don't understand who or what is a teacher. So a circular definition would be going back to the point that you started. It's in a circle, but people don't really get out of the loop. So a better definition is definitely a teacher would be a person who teaches what can be done and what not. So rather than repeating the term from the word itself, you have to go beyond the circles, yeah, not circular. So now let's take a look at the fourth point of evaluating a good definition. So good definitions definitely avoid obscure and figurative language. Let's try this. If I ask you something, let's say, what's a bottle? You can't go on by saying that it's the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. It has the right amount of water in it, and every drip of it is just like the sound of the sea hitting the rock and whatnot. So yes, it's beautiful, but again, it is too flowery. Figurative language is basically flowery language that actually conceals the real meaning or the real definition. So good definitions should be very direct, very straightforward. Okay, now let's move on to the fifth point. Well, good definitions should definitely avoid emotive language. Okay, what do I mean by this? Emotive language, like I've said earlier, has emotions in it, feelings in it, where it could be positive or negative. So if I again ask you about the bottle, you should not say that, okay, a bottle is blah, 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 and I really like the bottle. And a bottle is definitely the most significant thing on earth. So when you give these additional information that contains a sort of preference, a sort of liking, it then becomes emotive. So a good definition should definitely avoid emotive language. Okay, let's take a look at this. If you take a look at the picture, it's a penguin. So if someone asks you to actually define a penguin, and you say a bird that lives in Antarctica, it's both too broad and too narrow. Why? Too broad in the sense that there could be other birds living in Antarctica. Too narrow in the sense that penguins also live in other places, not only confined to Antarctica. So the definition now, it actually fails to follow the first bullet, where a good definition should never be too broad or too narrow. Okay, right, done with that. Now let's take a look at the communication styles, yeah, of people. A very good critical thinker is always aware that there are differences in individual as well as in groups when it comes to communication styles. So understanding our styles and of those who are actually talking to us makes us good communicators, facilitates our relationships, and also boosts our critical thinking skills. All right. There are basically 4 types of communication style. First one being assertive, second being aggressive, third passive, and the fourth one would be passive-aggressive communicators. So there are clear distinctions between these 4 types of communicators, where the first one, assertive. Assertive communicators are actually quite okay, quite easy to understand, quite easy to deal with, because these type of communicators are very clear. They know what they want, and they will also try to strive for mutual satisfaction, which means they try to understand what do you want and try to fulfill what information or what sort of communication you want and deliver them. So assertive communicators are very clear. They articulate well. They are respectful of your needs. So they understand. So when they do this, they communicate their own needs and also, again, the key word, yeah, try to achieve mutual satisfaction through solutions. They'll solve it. Okay, this is quite different from the opposite, rather, the aggressive communicator. So the aggressive communicators, yeah, they actually attempt to always do it on their own way. They always put their needs first compared to the communicators. So what happens is they do use some means of aggression. They could either control other people through manipulation, through control tactics. Okay? And the third one, passive communicators. So passive communicators, from the word itself, they are quite regressive, quite not that upfront, you know. They try to avoid confrontation. They're very compliant, and they will always and often put the needs of others as opposed to theirs at first. So they are always concerned about the needs of the other communicators, and they tend not to express what they feel or what they want to the rest. Okay, the last one, passive aggressive. So if you could see that it's a combination of the third and the second communication style, and this type of communicators are very different. Passive aggressive communicators, they just avoid confrontation. Being passive, they avoid confrontation, but they also employ these aggressive communicators methods by using devious means, yeah, such as manipulation, control tactics, and they always get their way out of the communication. So do not really care about the other person's feelings, communication, or even needs. Okay, let me give you some examples of this, yeah? So let's go back, a very quick one. Assertive communicators, for example, if you have problems in class, you would straight away either raise your hands up and then confront the teacher, and then tell the teacher in a very nice way, polite way, where the teacher would understand, and then the teacher might, in most cases, get back to you, and then both of you are now satisfied. So in the next class, you're happy with the teacher. That's assertive. So aggressive communicator might not confront you, but what they might do is they might, for example, if it's a teacher and the student, again, the student is an aggressive communicator, he might not at all tell the teacher that he's not happy with the teacher. The communicator might do some devious things like twisting the teacher's word, blaming the teacher in front of the class, or even reporting the teacher to some other people, gossiping about the teacher. So that's aggressive. Damaging the teacher's car, that's very extreme level of aggression. So passive communicator, very simple. If you're the student, you're a passive communicator. You might not even express, make eye contact to the teacher and tell your distress, tell your needs to the teacher. So the teacher would never know that you had some issues and problems with him or her. So the last one is quite dangerous. Passive aggressive communicators. What do? They do not tell the teacher that they have problems with the teacher, but devious means. They might harm the teacher. They might do something really bad in order to get their way. But one difference is the teacher would not know, most probably, that this student has actually done those devious things to him. So in a very silent way. Okay. So most politicians, for example, they're very assertive. So that's how they get their way done. Okay. Communication styles, they are also influenced by other factors, such as gender. So men and women communicate differently. You can take a look at the textbook. We have a very lengthy explanation on that, about how the male brain works and how the female brain works. So sometimes when men say something, women take it in another way, and so on and so forth. Yeah, there's one recent one that I read. It's a meme, I think. So the man wants to go out for golfing, and then the girl definitely not happy with it, but she just says that fine, go ahead, and the man actually packs up the bag and goes for golfing. So what does that mean? It just means that men accept things at a very literal level, at a very surface level, whereas the female actually expects the men to understand that fine, go ahead with it actually means a big no. So male and female language. Then let's take a look at the second one, where ethnicity also plays a major role in influencing our communication style. Yeah? So if you're from a different ethnic group, you might not get the message of the other ethnic group. For example, let's talk about the thumb. So the thumb in some countries, in most commonly accepted sign when you are stuck at the roadside, maybe you have a flat tire and you're asking for a lift, you could actually use a thumbs up. But a thumbs up in some Middle Eastern countries like Iran and so on, it's actually a bad word, a bad sign. So things like this could differ between ethnics, between your background from different countries. Okay, also with culture and dress code as well. So, okay. If we take a look at international diplomacy, sometimes they don't really tell you that they are friends. The leader of country A and the leader of country B, they're actually friends, but a simple gesture like this, we could see that George W. Bush is actually holding the hand of the Saudi king, so just to show the world, the press, the media, that they actually have a very good bond. Both the countries are okay with each other, but very non-verbal in that sense. Okay, the last one, yeah. There's also another case study where we've got the Mayan calendar, where a lot of people believed that the world was about to end at some point, way back in 2000 and then 2012 and whatnot, and that was due to the misinterpretation of the symbols in the Mayan calendar, some parts of it. So when they read it and then they somehow interpret that, and then they came up with rumors or the prophecies that the world is going to end, but actually it was not. So misinterpretation is very, very, very dangerous. So that's about it.